Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. Today, our guests are esteemed members of the local media.
Hi, I'm Robin Smith with the Orleans County Record.
Bethany Dunbar with the Chronicle.
And Edward Barber with the Newport Daily Express.
Today, we're here to talk about 2013 in review in the news. So, beforehand, we were talking about the big newsmakers, and it's almost like there's so many of them, we could probably have like a 24-hour show. But I think we all agreed on an hour would probably be enough.
We can talk for longer than an hour, but we'll keep it to
Right.
We can do
We'll
round
try.
2 another day.
So what did we come up with about the big newsmakers of the year?
Newsmakers are the ones doing the economic development
Right.
in this region, which is sort of bending the curve of the economy up here over time, many people hope.
So is that's going to include like Walmart, JP, Main Street? So what are you seeing? What do you think, Robin?
Well, I mean, if I was picking one story, I would have to say it's kind of the yin and yang of economic development. One is Walmart going from just like Giselle Seymour of BB Plain, just hoping she can see a Walmart come to Derby, to it actually getting to the point where they expect to have an application before the end of this year. So Walmart's close. On the flip side, the big announcements about what Bill Stenger was doing came last fall, and the pace is a little slower than what he announced. So there's this big anticipation, kind of, oh boy, we haven't seen it all yet. We know money's changed hands on downtown businesses in Newport, and Jay Peak's got a new hotel that will be open soon. Burke Mountain hasn't started building yet. So there's kind of like this, 2013 is a wait and see year for the EB5
The lull
projects.
before the storm.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I've been an eternal optimist, but this year has been a little bit of a struggle for me to maintain my optimism. I'm waiting for a building to come crashing down. You know, the Main Street building.
The news about the Mink, the window factory not coming,
Right.
I think really people were really hit by that in a way. They were like, oh gee, is this a sign that, it's not gonna, all this stuff isn't really gonna happen? But it sounds as though the rest of it's all on track, and really and truly it couldn't have happened that quickly. So we can wait, and I think that a lot of it is pretty serious and pretty real. But of course we're gonna have to wait and see. But I think especially in Newport City, it's going to change the city dramatically.
Well, that's what some people say is I don't look at the changes, and I mean this positively. I don't look at the changes that dramatic, because if we really look, I mean that in a positive sense. If we're having new jobs coming, new industry, we have tourism. But on the other hand, is we're actually reclaiming what we've lost over the last 50 years.
Good point.
Newport used to be an industrial hub, and then to top it off, at one point into the early 70s or late 60s, the interstate ran right down through Main Street. In other words, the interstate wasn't there. So I'm not really concerned about the negative aspects that some people worry about.
Well, I think there's two parts to this. If we just take Walmart for one example, there's a lot of optimism because we lost our department store up here 15 years ago. It's been a while anyway. So what we're looking at now is something that comes in that offers the products and services that we need in our community without having to drive hour and a half, 2 hours away. And people look at that in a very positive manner. But what they don't see or foresee is the impact that has on their individual lives. And by that I mean, when you get Walmart in and you get some of the other box stores that'll come along with it, because they always do, then you have other issues such as traffic. They did a traffic study in 2006 which said that it's going to take 20 minutes to get from Village Derby Center down to Newport. And people thinking about that when they're thinking about how good the economic development on Derby Road would be. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that people going to get what they pay for, and part of what they pay for when you get economic development are there's consequences that come along with it, and that's a serious consequence.
Well, actually, I agree with you totally, because we've got to, even though I'm an optimist, is I think we need to be careful that we don't get too much of a good thing, because too much of a good thing is a bad thing.
And also too fast,
Right.
and also without planning. I mean, I think the area hasn't been, it's all looking like it's going to happen pretty fast, and so our municipalities and NVDA and everyone haven't faced this kind of development before. One of the things that both Derby Selectmen and City Council have said is they don't want impact fees. But, at the Chronicle, we ended up doing an editorial saying maybe they should think a little more about that, because there will be impact, and also the businesses that might have an impact fee are used to that, and they consider it part of business, and it could just make things go smoother. Part of the process of doing impact fees is more planning. I mean, it's hard to plan when things are a bit up in the air and not exact, and we don't know when and so on, but to just say we don't, absolutely, it might be short-sighted. So we'll see. I mean,
I think that if you listen to some of the planners and the select board in Derby, they believe that the impact fees are going to be placed on developers by the Act 250 Commission.
That's correct.
And they believe that, the Act 250 Commission is going to tell Walmart to build a new intersection where their main entrance is going to go in across from what used to be, I date myself, Lowe's.
Right.
And, right in there, also they may make them
A turning
change
lane.
the access from Shattuck Hill Road. And so they think that the state commission is going to do the heavy lifting on that. So, and they don't have the expertise to ask for it, and they don't really want to take that. If you create jobs and boost the tax base, add to the grand list. So, for now, Newport City is really like, yeah, come on down and do whatever you want, because I mean, within their pretty aggressive, also their downtown friendly zoning, which Derby doesn't have.
Even if they say they want it, they say they don't want it, that's out of their control.
And the thing that to mention about in Derby, Derby pays less than $100,000, significantly less for its
Police presence. Yes.
Because Derby Line is swimming with Border Patrol, so there's just
Right.
like the occasional deputy to watch for speeding, and Derby Center is, a state thoroughfare basically with the trucks going through. So, the town of Derby really doesn't put a lot of money into law enforcement, and if they have to pick up a little extra, it's not going to have a huge impact on the taxpayer in Derby.
And that is
So
an
they
issue
see
they
that
can
as-
negotiate as well with Walmart going forward.
Yeah.
They can turn around and say, look, we are having a problem here. If you want us, if you give us $12,000 a year so we have a greater police presence to respond to calls there, they might be able to negotiate that.
Here's the problem I see is Newport has been a city for a long time, and they've dealt with city issues. They pretty much know how things operate. Things are in place. Derby, on the other hand, is back when I started work for the Chronicle. It was really true. It was, the people who served on the boards were good people, but it was still, kind of like a good old boy mentality. And this is really new to this, the town of Derby. When my father-in-law, who just passed away, he talked about when he grew up, he picked potatoes up along the Derby Road. When I grew up, a lot of it was cornfields. Newport is used to change because Newport is continually changing, but for generations, Derby hasn't changed much. And now, boom.
In
It
the
is a big
decade
difference,
that, and a bit since I moved back from the Banana Belt in Bennington, Yeah, I spent Monday. And it is different. It is the Banana Belt. We've got our first traffic light in Derby. I mean, and a lot of towns say like it's a one traffic light town. Well, for a long time we weren't
Is there
even.
no traffic?
Yeah,
Wait a
and
minute.
now we
Well,
have, you
Now
know,
we're going to have
two
I
and
have-
probably more now.
But I have all right, first of all, let me say, there's a corner in that up near the Cow Palace. That's for probably as long as you've even been a reporter. They've talked about that corner, haven't
Oh,
they?
yeah, yep.
This is how long. See, we move slow up here. We do. We don't, and that's one thing it can be.
Which
'cause-
is great,
E-
but everything else
do you
might
know?
be-
Do you know? I have a newspaper article from Prohibition how the bootleggers were coming out of Canada, and if they were taking that corner too sharp, their wood spoked wheels were snapping off and they were tumbling there. And I have a photo. I have a photo of it. There used to be there used to be a light there. I have a photo of the light right there. And I have another article I just got. It was Jerry Davis back, I think it was the 1970s, battled tooth and nail to make sure a light didn't go in there. That's how long.
So there was a light back, and I don't remember.
Yeah, I have.
that.
I,
know, that's
before my
pretty
time.
no,
That's cool.
I believe it was like the 40s.
Yeah.
Before
it a
we,
candle?
before we were
No.
born.
Right. And
Forgive
the
us.
thing-
We weren't
the thing
there.
is things we do. Our idea of change here comes relatively slow, and now,
Absolutely.
boom.
Right, but are we ready is
Right.
just my question, I guess. I'm not sure.
One of the positives I do see is in Newport. The city of Newport over a number of years has invested in their downtown and their Main Street area. From the bricks that they put in and the work they did in the sidewalks. And it's great, but a lot of it still look kind of shabby. And I know there are some people who regret the idea that they're going to tear down part of that one block on Main Street. But I think that as far as tourism goes, I think that having it dressed up and having the whole area look really nice and having the retail offices there that are going to attract tourism, that's going to be a real benefit for the community. Not just for Newport, but especially for Newport. It expands their tax base, bringing in ANC Bio as well, putting in the Hotel Convention Center. That all helps their tax base, which is a major issue in the city of Newport.
And not only that, but there's a sense in a lot of towns where a Walmart comes in, and I know many people are very unhappy about Walmart idea, but they also don't like having to drive an hour and a half in any direction to buy some essentials. And we used to have a store that provided that in the Ames store,
Right.
and not that long ago. So the interesting thing is that Newport, if the growth that is slated to happens over the next 5 years, Newport will be positioned to not only survive a Walmart sitting outside the border, but to benefit significantly and actually benefit Walmart, because all these people are going to come in that have nothing to do with Walmart. They're coming to stay in these hotels and work at other places. And then Walmart just sort of becomes another part of the economic picture of the community. Instead of it being this sort of big box that plops down in the middle of nowhere and destroys downtowns all around
Well,
it.
and that's probably
You know.
why, Walmart hasn't wanted to come as soon, because, we don't have a huge population here, and will Canadians come down? I mean, but it's true that if the whole thing mixes together, it could work much better. And people when Joseph Gresser, our reporter, did a story about Black Friday and talking to some of the businesses. Some of those businesses in Newport are already thinking about, well, how do we compete with Walmart? They're already competing with the internet. They've got ideas. They have, they have to put their prices down. They have to react. And so they're being smart. They're
Right.
planning ahead, and that's good to see.
What is the pick and shovel going to do? I mean, it's one thing to say a restaurant's going to benefit or a specialty retail store is going to benefit. But you look at a pick and shovel, and what's the impact going to be for them? Because anything they offer pretty much is going to be offered to Walmart.
Pick and Shovel's all about service, though. You walk
that is
in
true.
there and
And quality.
yes.
And quality.
And
Yeah.
quality.
Right.
And what they need most, more than anything, is handicap or access, not just for handicapped folks, but my sister who, you know, like those stairs are challenging for my sister. Never mind,
they should address
she's not
that.
handicapped, she can make it. But a lot of people are turned away. The Newport City mayor says his mom has trouble in there.
Yeah.
They
I-
need,
yeah.
and if this agreement that the people with the Vermont Natural Resources Council and Preservation Trust made with the Walmart developer Jeff
Right.
Davis, they're going to have a couple $100,000 to use in grants for different downtown improvement projects,
Right.
like helping Pick and Shovel pay for an elevator.
That would be
An
excellent.
elevator opens up that multi-level store to everybody, and all of a sudden, it's your downtown go-to store, and you can walk there in Newport. And it has, like, I went last weekend, and they have popcorn. It's
Okay,
like,
The summer they
that's
have ice
cool.
cream.
And ice cream in the summer,
And they
they're a
have
destination.
higher end clothing. I mean, they have Carhartts and Woolrich and
Yeah,
stuff.
this is
One of the benefits of the economic development that's been proposed so far is it's not all put into one town. You've got the development of the airport in Coventry, and that
Right.
kind of diversifies things. People aren't always going to have to drive into Newport or into
Right.
Derby. They drive elsewhere, or up at Jay, which is doing a massive, projects up there. And I think that that's kind of a benefit too, because if you live in Jay, driving up here to work at Walmart for $8 an hour is kind of difficult, on the gas bill. But if they can go to Jay, because they live in Jay, or if they're in North Troy, that kind of helps it because it diversifies it, and down in Burke as well. It helps diversify where the jobs are, and I think that's going to be a benefit as well.
I think one of the things that the area hasn't even really thought about a lot yet is if that airport expands, how much that could change things. Because the traffic that would be coming in, people flying in, could be much more than it is now.
Here's a question though, and we've really got to move on to the next. 20 minutes is already down. I know our unemployment is high here, but from being an employer myself, from having a business, I'm going to tell you, it's not easy finding unemployed people. Anybody who wants to work for me are already employed.
You've got a couple jobs probably.
Yeah, I don't, or they want a sideline job, but I find, is there enough people who really want to work to fill those?
No, they're going to have an influx of people coming into the overall community, not just necessarily
Right, no, I know
Newport
that.
Derby, but into Orleans County.
But actually,
There-
our unemployment
Go ahead.
rate is not as high as it was, and I happen to bring those numbers with me. Newport was 5.2, and last year it was 6.1. Compared to the state rate, it is higher. The state rate was 3.7, last year was 4.4.
But when you get below 5%, you're starting to hit the maximum employment levels.
Right.
Because what happens is there's always people in and out of the employment picture, and you start to reach the folks who really have some problems holding down a job.
Having the
or
skills.
Having skills. They got a drunk driving conviction and they can't drive.
a car,
The endless issues that are creating. That's where things like, I just did a story about the carpool setup that the state has with this college-based national group called Zimride, and Go Vermont. It's a website, people can look it up, but there's a group of about a dozen people in Canaan who want to work in housekeeping at Jay. They can't afford to drive themselves, that's too far, but they can carpool or vanpool, and the state has this setup that'll make it possible, a hotline, all that. That's where things that we don't do right now, because we're used to the idea that we can get ourselves to where we need to go, I think. And the other thing that, if you talk to people, it's not, what used to be is that you got in a job and you held it because that was a job. If Scott's looking for an employee, they're already working. Guess what? You might have to pay a little more to get them to leave that good job to come to a better job. And employers are going to discover that when the employment level hits that lower point, all of a sudden you're competing with each other for workers.
And you're going to
guess what? That's great for
The workers.
the employees. It's a little tough for business, but you know what? If it's worth doing,
Well, that's why
you get
people
good
say,
people.
That's why people say, well, a lot of these are going to be low-paying jobs. Well, that's might be true to a degree, but even the low-paying ones, once you know, if you're not going to raise your pay, you're not going to find workers either.
Right.
So
That's right.
All right, we've really got to move on, but on the top.
Can we segue into IROC?
Yeah, that's what- actually,
The
that's
reason
what-
why I say that
No, that's what I was
IROC and
gonna say.
recreation, because when people come into our community, because we'll have people who are specialists, you know, have certain education and skills that we don't have here. And when they get here, what are they going to do? And I think that's kind of, if you would, the next step we
Right.
take is talk about what happens, especially with IROC closing down. That was a real community center, if you will. It was a magnet for the community, and it offered a lot
But
more than
why
just
didn't why didn't
exercising.
it ever catch hold though?
Because it was
really-
built before its time under, I mean,
It had too much debt.
we talked
Yeah,
about
but
this. It
people
had
did
too
not-
much debt. There were too many people who were already ticked off because they backed out of the rink
The hockey rink.
situation.
Mhm.
Some of the concepts for how they would generate money didn't work here. And as Phil White, and people have given Phil White a hard time, I've heard people say, you know, well, as he
He
said,
did it-
in the summer, everybody's outside and the pool doesn't get used. And they just didn't, they never got out from under that debt. as
He
you
did a
said.
tremendous job, but
And the economy was
He was up against
not
that.
good here. And if Iraq was being planned today,
right.
it would be a totally different picture, I believe.
All right, so
They just couldn't do
I,
it.
one of the problems is I was on the IROC board when we made the decision to put in a field house and a pool as opposed to the skating
Oh,
rink.
okay, well, now
And
I
we
know all
did
about
that
it.
because we hired Jim Davis, and because he had the expertise that we really needed.
Yep.
And what happened is, he said there was no way we'd be able to get that up and running, and I believe he's right. I mean, it was up for 9 years, 8 years, something like that. It wouldn't have been functioning in 3 years if we had gone that route.
Right.
Now, the problem is after Jim Davis left, he had a dual role. One was to be the overall manager of the facility, but he also had a tremendous fundraising role, and
Yeah.
he was very successful at it. When they got to a particular point where they said, let's go, and I was off the board at that point, and they started rolling with it, they didn't have all money in place, so they went out and borrowed it. And then when Jim Davis left, they didn't put anybody in a position who was a fundraiser. And that's where we had the problem. We went like 4 years or 5 years before Phil White came on board, where we didn't, all they were trying to do was just make ends meet on a daily operating basis, which they were able to do. But they were saddled with tremendous debt, and they didn't keep their focus on that early on, and that eventually snowballed into its closure, which is really unfortunate, because if you went in there on a Saturday in the winter, that place was packed from 9 a.m. or 8 or 9 a.m. till 1 or 2 o'clock because of at the time, Border Hoops, now Northeast Kingdom Hoops.
Yep.
And I used to work out there all the time. There were people in walking all day long.
Yep.
Seniors, young people with their kids in a stroller, grandma, mom, daughter, it was a very well utilized facility, but it just couldn't make ends meet. And you're right, if they had waited a few years and got a little bit more money, if they had continued with the fundraising efforts, we might have a whole different picture than we have right now.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I
hindsight
think
is
it's really
2020.
sad.
One of the
And
best
it
things that
reflects
came out of
a
it,
tough
though,
time.
is through Phil White, was all the other outdoor recreation
Yep.
opportunities that came from the dandelion run to the triathlons to the swimming competitions they have here. And that's a tremendous draw, because it's not just local community. People are coming in, they're going to restaurants, they're renting
Spending
rooms, they're going to campgrounds. And that was a tremendous draw. And that's something, when people come in to our community to work here, they're going to see those type of things that go on. The different activities that they have down in Newport, different times of the year. And those are the things that help draw people in, because they say, what can I do up here? there's plenty to do.
There's plenty
Now,
of-
you know what, I think three of us are Derby residents. You're Derby line, you're Derby, I'm Derby, so don't come over
You know,
here.
it depends if you, there are people who think Derby and Derby Line
Oh,
are
I
different
know.
communities.
It's kind of like,
You just gotta, I'm just throwing that out there because
They
I
have
know
their own
you
little
know who you
kingdom.
are.
The kingdom on the border.
Part of the summer activities, I don't know if you guys know this, Phil is talking about doing a horseback ride, a trail ride from Pie to Pie. So we'll have
Oh, it's
West
fabulous.
Glover tied in with Coventry.
So-
So
Which I
what,
think is
so what I was
fabulous.
going to say is maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but Newport does so much for its young people. Newport does. It has a great rec program.
Absolutely.
Derby, with all respect to my friend on the select board, we don't have much. Why couldn't Derby had?
We have tennis courts.
Why didn't we
you know.
take? Why didn't we take over IROC and put a few cents on the tax rate and had that been a town-run rec program?
Did
And
anyone suggest that?
oh,
That's a good idea.
Yes,
I don't-
it just seems like the lodge because Derby is a progressive upcoming town. It just like I just heard. I understand that the pool now has been filled in.
I'm in
That's so
tears.
sad.
I used to
And-
swim
and
6
it's
to
like-
9 miles a week in that pool.
My father did. He's almost 79 years
Yeah.
old. He swam in it all the time, and it's been filled in. I never, ever thought it would get to be that. Okay, with IROC, healthcare, because there was a lot of, a lot of people did get healthy at IROC, but boom, this year, healthcare. You can look at it on the national level, state level, and we've all been watching what's been happening at North Country. And this is the time I'm going to put a disclaimer in. During the last round of layoffs, I was number one to be laid off out of almost 20 of us, so I just wanted to put that in as a bit of a disclaimer that, and my wife does work there, so I just
Right.
wanted to put that in.
I don't think anybody should be surprised at layoffs in any healthcare facility of any size because the economy, during the recession, if you opened up the classified ad section of any newspaper, the only people who were hiring were schools and hospitals, healthcare facilities, nursing homes, whatever. They were somewhat insulated from the impact. Over time, though, that started to change, and now with the whole change in how health care is insurance is being funded, and ironically, the sequester is having an impact in interesting ways that none of us really understand because it's a weird mechanism that's starting to trickle down. So the fact that North Country cut back, no surprise, but it is going to start to have an impact over time on what kind of services you get at your local hospital and clinic and how much services are going to have to be available at the big regional hospital because the little hospitals can't afford to do it they can't do it under the structure because it's of economy of scale. We're going to start to see that.
The problems at North Country Hospital, I think, are something that the state needs to look at. And the reason why I say that is, I don't know how they do the negotiations, but North Country Hospital has the lowest reimbursement rate than any other hospital in the state of Vermont. My question is why? Why is it that other small community hospitals like down in Morrisville, how come the reimbursement rate they get from the state or from the feds is higher than what we get up here? It doesn't make sense. And I say that in 2 ways. First of all, it does make it more tough economically for them to provide services. They also always trying to attract doctors, nurses, other healthcare professionals. They can't pay them as much as they can pay them elsewhere. And then we had the state coming in and saying this is an underserved population, in Vermont. Up here is underserved for healthcare reasons. That just doesn't make sense. The solution then is to pay us a rate and make it more uniform, not leaving out the big medical center in Burlington, but for the smaller, more rural hospitals, they should have a uniform reimbursement rate and then have them work with that. And that means that others might have to tighten their belt a little bit, and North Country Hospital can benefit because they'll have a rate that's commensurate with, competitive with other hospitals throughout the state.
Then we have, because right now, after the beginning of the year, we're having an outflow of medical people. as in we're losing some doctors, we're losing some healthcare providers, and that's a fact. Some are just leaving, others are retiring. But then at the same time, you're having more people getting on insurance. So then you're having an outflow of medical people, but more people needing services. And that's how come, and I will tell you, even though I got laid off, I'll tell you, I had 10 great years, almost as great as my years at the Chronicle. It was a great place to work. They pay their workers outstanding. And it was a great place to work, but it's like anything. We are now, healthcare is in transition, and it's
going to be tough.
It is because one thing, the two dashing men on both sides of the table here, Ed and I, we share in common. We both served in the Vermont House, and I don't know what it was like for you, but we, in my generation of legislators, we saw this coming, and. And I would meet with the administration and I would tell them this is, because this problem actually came north. We would have people from, I believe it was Bennington Hospital and a couple of others down here, like 3 years before it hit up here, they were like begging and groveling. They were at this point right now. I don't know what healthcare was like during your tenure.
Well, I was on Health and Welfare Committee, and we were trying to find solutions. I mean, they were pushing for single payer, which I wasn't an advocate of. But they were looking for solutions at the time. But again, it's one of those things that you just can't wrap your brain around, because that was the year that Snelling was reelected, and that was the last tenure of Madeline Kunin. And they had a budget deficit, so they decided they wanted to have a balanced budget when she left because it would make it look good. And what they did was they turned around and they deferred a lot of the bills that they were supposed to pay in the prior fiscal year, and deferred them over to the new fiscal year and left it up for the new legislature and the new governor to deal with. The problem with that is that one of the things that they did was they took Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements and froze them for 6 weeks. So you're up in an area where 60–70% of the reimbursements you get, and I'm not even saying people don't pay, but just your reimbursements you're getting, 60% of your population is Medicare and Medicaid. Now, how do you, and as a disclaimer, at the time I was married to Dr. Fariel Barber, practicing down in Orleans. Now, how do you expect that doctor to sit there without that money coming in and be able to make payroll and pay her bills? At the same time that they were doing that, the prior legislature passed a bill. I think they're allocated $120,000 to do a study to see why there weren't enough doctors up in our area. Well, hello, it doesn't take a genius to connect the dots. So it's been an issue long since before I was there, and it's one that they just keep hashing forward and trying to resolve.
So I have a question for you.
Okay.
You said at the time you were not in favor of single payer. I
Right.
wonder if you still feel the same way, because I keep hearing so many people saying this system that the website's not working and all this stuff is so complicated and difficult. Wouldn't it be great to just go with single payer? And I've heard people say that who did not support it, years ago, and now it's like, geez, maybe we should just do that. I mean, I don't know if that's, I'm sure it wouldn't be a simple solution, but this sort of halfway thing where, the 25-year-olds have to start paying a lot more, and, it's tough on some of the people to get into this healthcare program. What do you
that's
think?
True. Well, let me say that the system we had was broken. And partly it's because they did little piecemeal things that they were trying to fix it, like having what's called community rating, so which drove a lot of insurance companies out, which drove out companies that where you had to go in and give good rates to your customers, and when you drive enough competition out of the field and narrow it down, then those remaining companies can put their rates up, because
That's what's happening on a national scale right now,
Yeah.
because everybody's got community rating now,
So,
basically.
yeah.
So,
I mean, I
Now
agree
we're
that
into
there
that.
needs to be a major overhaul, and to an extent there was, but I think there are other ways that they can do it. For example, they can turn around, we'll just use hospitals as an example, and say, we're giving you a flat amount of money this year. We don't care how you spend it. but we're going to turn around and make sure we're going to have you keep track to make sure that the population you serve is healthy and getting the services they need. One of the rationale behind doing that is that you don't turn around and run a whole bunch of tests that are needless, so you can turn around and get a reimbursement for it. It's like, here's the pot of money, and they could do that with private clinics, like the one in Orleans,
Right.
or up in Island Pond, and say, here, we're going to give you this. You guys figure out how you can give the best quality care at the price that we're giving you.
But
And
what
then-
about liability? Aren't a lot of those tests to avoid, liability?
Well, to an extent they are, to an extent they're not. A lot of them, they just run them because it's by rote.
They know they're gonna get
But,
some money.
then the liability issue is another one that needs to be addressed as
And
well,
patients
which
like
they
to
don't do.
diagnose themselves too, and they already, when they go into the doctor's office, they already know, they think, like, they want an MRI when a X-ray, which is much cheaper, would do the thing.
Well,
mean,
that's where, I'm in favor of not having more information before you go into any expert conversation. Like, if you're going to have your car fixed, maybe you should know a little bit about what you're going in for before, if you know that you need an alignment, and when you get your tires on, it's because your tires are wearing on one side, you can do a little research and find out what that, and shop around to get the best price. We do it with our cars. Very seldom do we do it with our health care until
More
you're.
and more, I think people
Well,
do.
they have to.
And you can learn to
but-
say no, which
Well,
is when
and
the
I
doctor wants to run a
personally
battery
have
test, you
said
tell them
no.
why I don't want
But a
those
lot
done.
of people are just, like my mom, for example, you look at a doctor as someone who's an expert, and you're going to them for help, and you don't really, if they say you should do this, then you go along with it.
Right, but that's
And
also that
that's
generation.
part of the problem.
More than,
Yeah.
say, our generation or our kids. They're
Yeah.
a little more questioning sometimes.
One of the things that we should just mention here while we're talking about healthcare is that North Country's had some fairly controversial scandals happen recently. A laptop that was full of
Right.
private information got out. There was some practices in the hospital of how they handled bloodborne, cleaning up after blood to protect from bloodborne diseases and things like that. Some of those things haven't finished playing out.
Right.
And that's the kind of thing where hospitals are under more scrutiny and should be. But in the past, there's some really, really nasty little bugs floating around that are resistant to
Antibiotics.
antibiotics. Thank you. And hospitals got to get public with how they're cleaning to make sure these bacteria aren't present, and because you don't want to go in the hospital with something minor and come and end up with something really serious
Right.
because they're not doing a good job.
Well,
So these are important stories.
They are.
Keep
I was-
following
I was
them.
going to
But
mention
this is actually bigger story in the sense of there's been this whole series of things, and as I said, I don't want to go too much into it because I used to be the one that actually kind of managed the story as a PR person, but the thing is, it has a wider implication that this is why we should be wanting, that North Country and the community needs to come together on this, because how are we going to get new doctors and medical providers? If you were thinking about going to a new newspaper, and you did a Google search on that paper and you found out it's up in everything's in turmoil, you probably wouldn't go there. And I think that's why these issues, we ought to all take them seriously. And I know the hospital does. They take them seriously. But, this is, in the days of the internet, everything's out there.
That laptop story, it's hard to know, but it's one way or another that information got out of the hospital. Now, was it the employee?
Which employee did it?
Yeah.
Right. So I mean,
There's some internal
there's
issues
some
there.
internal issues
The
there.
legal issues that work out on that.
And
Yeah.
the man has been charged, has denied it. He's
Yep.
representing himself, which I think is probably too bad. But yeah, like you said, that story is still playing out. We don't know, but it does seem that the hospital needs to, and they probably are, really look at their policies about those computer records to make sure nothing like this could happen again. And I think that the hospital needs to, you know, assure, and just saying, oh, it's okay, I think is not enough. I think they need to assure the public and say,
Yeah, I think a
these
public
are the
forum
exact
even.
things that we've done to make sure this wouldn't happen again.
But then it even gets stranger. You've done court news. You've done court news. Now tell me this. Maybe I'm wrong, because I know in small town America, we all talk about, we all have conflicts. Because, like, as I said, my wife works at the hospital. You know, you've served in the legislature. You were married to a doctor. But then I look at State's Attorney Franklin prosecuting the case against Christian George Cornelius, and his wife is the spokesperson for the hospital. Now, is that a conflict, or
Well,
is it not?
You know, it's not a direct conflict, but
On the other hand, it might
it
be
certainly
less.
is an appearance of a conflict. And
Yeah.
I would err on the side, as a journalist, you correctly brought up your connection. You correctly brought up your connection with IROC. These are things that, as journalists, we have to do that in order to
Yeah.
have public trust in what we're doing. So I don't think the state's attorney gets free ride for that. I think if the judge doesn't hold him accountable, I think he has to hold his office above reproach.
Right.
So that's up to him. If it legally
But that's
it
an
doesn't
issue that
require.
could be raised by the defense attorney too, and say,
Well,
Well,
there
but
is a
there isn't
conflict
one,
of
and that's
interest.
where if you defend
Right.
yourself,
You're
you're.
in trouble.
But the guy, if you don't have a low enough income or no income, as a lot of people, he has to hire his own attorney.
Well, he probably
to
wouldn't
do
have
it.
an income. Okay.
Can I just bring
okay,
up
go
one
ahead.
other thing about the healthcare industry, and that is, if you go back 25 years and you look at the hospital, we had a 3-story building and a medical arts building. Now you go back there and they have, what, 4 other buildings off to the side? They've got the wellness center up the road. And when you talk about increase in healthcare costs, that's a part of it. Now, we might be getting better service, and certainly I had right shoulder surgery back in the early part of the summer. If they didn't have the orthopedic surgeon up here, I would have had to get a ride to Morrisville and have it done there and then a ride back afterward, which puts up my costs, and it takes somebody else out of work to go and do that for me.
Go
But-
Vermont. If you need a ride somewhere like that,
Go
you can
Vermont.
find a ride.
Tell 'em.
I'm telling you, it's a great.
It's called what?
Carpool.
Go
Go
Vermont.
Vermont.
Go
It's a
Vermont.
So I think-
website.
Okay.
It's
So I'm just
fabulous.
saying, when healthcare costs, we're getting better quality service and more expedited service. That comes with a cost.
Right.
That's
The other,
reality.
the other thing about cost too, though, is that if it's a small hospital in a small area and, you know, you have a lab and you only do a few lab tests, then it's gonna increase the cost because you're not serving as many people. So, I mean, we're really lucky to have this little hospital.
That's it.
But there are some cost effects of the fact that and maybe as our population grows, it will help the hospital.
I'd like to slide into other court cases while we're talking about
Okay.
court cases, because
Good.
we've had some big things happen this past year, and the one that comes to my mind is because it's most recently in the court news is the fellow who held part of Newport in a
Hostage.
shutdown, and
Yeah.
Derek Niles is accused of that. And there's some mental health issues that are
Right.
being worked out now. That's a kind of story that really grabs the local
It does. and
readers, because you know, the idea of having your whole neighborhood shut down for a morning is pretty freaky.
Well,
Yeah.
let's say this about that story, that Derek Niles obviously had some issues, and thank God that the police handled that really well. I mean, we've covered around the state a lot of cases like that did not go as well as it did, so I just want to say that.
And I agree with that.
But it
And we
also
had
seems to be a trend, a little bit of a trend of these mental health issues or drug issues creating more crime.
Right.
You know, so I guess I just wanted to mention.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
lead off from the hospital, because we dealt with physical health care, and there is a let's be real, is we can bury our head in the sand, but we have a serious issue with mental health, not mental health, the facility, and drugs. And, I think what we're seeing is
And I agree with what Bethany said, is that they handled it well.
yep,
You remember a case down in Orleans, there
Oh,
was
yeah.
a veteran who was out firing his gun off, not at anybody, but
Yeah.
just outside, and he was flipping out. And a couple of police officers went down there, and one of them shot him twice with a shotgun. And having shotguns before, I know that you only need to do it once up at close range. You don't have to boom, boom. And the rationale was that the other trooper was in harm's way. Well, first of all, do some training so they don't go into harm's way. Second of all, negotiate, talk, defuse the situation. Don't go in there with guns raised, firing away. There's been too much of that throughout the state of Vermont. It happened another time up here in Newport. They went in an apartment and shot somebody. That's the wrong approach. And certainly, if I was a law enforcement officer, your life's on the line, and I certainly appreciate that. But this was a wonderful example to me, where an officer who was all alone went in there and was able to defuse that situation.
I want to mention that it's not like it doesn't happen. During that Derek Niles situation, and we're banning his name about, he's not been convicted of anything.
Charged
Right.
but not convicted.
So his name's out there, but still, it is his house, that's where he lived, During that standoff, there was scanner chatter of the chief telling people not to do anything. There was a comment made that somebody had a clear access, and he told everybody to
Stand
down, and they were negotiating at that point. Well, that's something else could have happened, and they're actively, consciously trying to do different things. The state police have experts that they call in automatically
Right.
for.
Yeah.
So I think we see a better
Would
handling.
we be remiss not to mention the fact that a person with mental health issues decided to roll over a bunch of sheriff's vehicles this summer as well?
And that case is still pending.
Well,
Right.
that
That
was
case is
that was
still
actually
last year,
Last
but he
year.
did,
Oh, it was?
he
It seemed like it was just
no,
so
I
recent.
know, but on the other
We
hand,
talk
he did,
about it.
he did get to be fair to Ed, though. He was in court this year.
It's
It's
Yeah.
still in court, it's
Right.
still
Yeah.
pending.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we
Yeah.
only have about 10 more minutes left, so what do you
Well,
want?
I want to throw in while we're still on tragic crime, we have to mention the shooting of the Barton woman by her friend
Oh, yeah.
Carlton.
Bickford.
Who then,
Bickford,
then
thank
went
you.
and passed
who-
away
who
himself.
Died
Yes.
while
That
he
was
was
so
in
Few weeks
custody in
later,
the
a few
hospital,
days.
and so that's one of those double tragedies that just
It just
shot. I drove
devastated
through
them.
Barton that weekend, and I drove past people who had pulled over on the off ramp of the interstate in Barton, and they were standing outside their trucks hugging each other. These are people, family members who had just heard
Big
about it, and they
families.
were driving to wherever to meet each other, and they were sobbing. My heart
It
went
was
out to the
devastating.
community, and Glover was upset as well.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
mean, those kind of things, we can't be there, we can't know everything, but it's just so tragic.
Then we have that
It
other,
is.
it hasn't come up in court yet. We have the Westfield murder. That was kind of a strange one. But then I know you followed the O'Hagan murder over in
Right.
Sheffield.
The O'Hagan murder happened 3 years ago. No one has been charged with murder, but I've been following the cases of the 3 suspects in federal court, and one of the suspects was just sentenced for something completely unrelated. Another one was sentenced for something completely unrelated. The third one is still in court in Caledonia County, and just, it's a very complicated case, but basically the 3 suspects still could be charged with murder. Some of the other, or in manslaughter, but some of the other charges that could have been brought have lapsed in terms of time, the statute of limitations. But the reason it's been such a difficult one for prosecutors is that there's no physical evidence. The gun's gone, and her body was in terrible shape when they found her. And the three suspects have been throwing around various stories of what happened, so you have witnesses that aren't lining up. But
Even they owned up to it though at one point.
they've
didn't they?
confessed,
little
but
bit
their
of-
And then
confessions
they've
have
and
given
then they
been-
can turn around and say they were making
Yeah,
it up.
but you know,
and that's the
I've
hard
often
part.
I've often been told you have to be really smart to be able to get away with a crime.
Or lucky, I
you
guess.
look at those
I know,
guys.
But if you're
Guys.
going to convict somebody based on a confession that they recanted not long after they said it, and there's no, it's all circumstantial,
yeah.
and you know,
we don't allow waterboarding either.
Well, yeah, that's right.
well, the-
Thank goodness. They don't. You know, they know that they're going to have these guys behind bars for a while on something,
Right.
and I believe that the idea is that they'll develop the case as they can, and that they
they
have
have been
gaps
trying
to
to
fill.
develop it.
Because
And
there
the-
is
the
no statute of
Caledonia-
limitations on murder.
Right, the Caledonia County State's Attorney has consulted with the Bennington County State's Attorney, this is the most recent thing that's happened, to look at the case, see whether, you know, anything could be done. The interesting witness is a man who happened to be in prison with two of these guys and who had his story, as told to him under no pressure, was perfectly lined up. In other words, the two people told him what they described had happened, and not as a confession, but to another prisoner. And he's been a witness in both of these other sentencings, just as a character of this person.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I think the most tragic thing is this wonderful member of our community was murdered, and that was just a horrible thing that happened.
Yep.
The second worst thing to me is that the family 3 years later still doesn't have closure, and that's just agonizing for them because
is.
you have to be able to finish it off before you can move forward, and
So-
they're just been in a holding pattern. Life is short; it's not fair for them.
Has the nature of, like, I can think of different brutal crimes, you know, murders over the years, but then I think of that one, Sheffield, but then the young teacher from St. Johnsbury.
Mm-hmm.
Are they getting more senseless? Are they, or is
I
it?
think so because of drugs.
I
Michael
think so
Norrie,
because of technology.
yeah, that too. I mean, but Michael Norrie, when he did confess, said that he was on meth. And it's just more and more drugs and crime are being matched up.
Right.
And I
I
hate to
bring
s-
up the technology part because I look at, because I cover school board meetings, and we have the obviously major issue they talk about is bullying. Back in the day when we were in school, Scott, when we got bullied, some guy would slam us into a locker room or slap us back the
And
side
it
of the
was
head.
more
Okay.
obvious. It was
obvious.
obvious. You could find out.
Now you're
had
sitting there
happened.
and you're texting somebody and you're sending something out and telling them, you know, you're a this and you're a that, which is a form of bullying. It's less obvious, but that leads to desensitizing because there's things that I might text, if I was a young person, I might text to somebody, you know, you're a jerk and whatever, that I wouldn't say to their face. So you get desensitized because now it's just like playing a computer game. You're just sitting there and you're just going
Yeah,
through the
they're
road.
not even real. To
Yeah,
you.
it's not real, exactly. So
Well,
you
letter
can say it
games are
without,
scary, too.
because the major thing is, to me, is when I turn around and I say something rude to one of you guys, I'm gonna understand it's rude because of your facial expression. You don't get that human interaction when you're texting a person.
Okay, we only have about 5 more minutes left.
I have. Let's throw out just some quick hit
Yep.
stories that happened this year. One of mine is the Northern Star playing the waters of the lake. That was kind of fun, I have to say. It's sort of one of those little signs of things. I heard recently that while their numbers of ticket sales wasn't quite as much as they were hoping for, it certainly was enough. So, you know, that's a positive and
Nice
an
thing for the
interesting
area.
local story.
Mhm.
You know, I just thought I'd throw it out.
I'll throw out the flip side on the technology. My coworker's car was stolen right out of the yard. And we
Favorite
put it on
story.
Facebook and boom, we found it. So that was kind of a fun one.
Yeah, and what I'll put out there is, and involves schools as well, North Country Union Junior High School has got major renovation projects that they're coming down the pike, and most of them are absolutely necessary. It's issues of safety, whether it's people being able to get in and out of the building, having fire doors that don't work, having asbestos in the facility, having heating and plumbing systems that are decades old that don't work. That's going to cost money to fix. North Country Union High School is slowly working toward a major renovation of the A and B wings, and they have a lot of issues that they have to deal with there as well. Then there's also the issue of whether or not there's going to be a junior, not a junior school, but a middle school over on the west side.
Yeah, that one
Been
is
kicking around
pretty
for a
well, not a new school, but can they share services? And because
Yeah.
there's
Right.
not enough interest amongst the different school
Right.
districts to go that junior high
Yeah,
route,
at this
but-
point, yeah, well, it wouldn't be a
you know.
junior high, it'd be a middle school, because it'd be 5th, 6th, 7th
Well,
grade to be
yeah.
able to get the numbers in, which is another thing, because equity in education, then the next step they want to do, or part of that is to say, now we have room in those schools so everybody can have preschool. Because some schools do that up here and some don't, and that's an equity and education issue. And just the last issue on education I'd like to raise is the Lake Region Union High School has just done a phenomenal job starting a couple of years ago when they took incoming freshmen and freshmen who are going to be sophomores and set up a summer math program for algebra and geometry, because they knew the kids were coming in, they're way behind, which is reflected in the test scores that they have out there. And they did that, and the first year they did it, they had, not every kid was eligible. They were eligible depending on whether they were having problems in math. And the first year they did that program, they had 80 students enrolled, which tells you the incredible community support that they have for that particular
Right.
program. And now they're taking a next step, or trying to take a next step starting next year. This year, they do have a algebra program for 8th graders. They have to come to the high school, and there's only a handful of them that do it, maybe 10. Next year, they want to open that program up to every student in the district down there who's in 8th grade, regardless of your ability in math, to come in first period, and Lake Region will provide the math teacher in the facility and be able to say, we're going to start teaching you math skills now, because if you take Algebra 1, Algebra 2 your first 2 years, then in your junior year, you take a test that includes geometry, of course you're not going to do well.
Yeah, exactly.
Plus, if you're going to take Career Center courses, you need to have all of that math under your belt if you're taking
Yeah.
types of technology, automotive, you name it.
I'm going to interrupt because we're running the risk of getting out of our
Right.
show here without mentioning wind power.
Oh, wind
It was shocking to imagine, but right now,
It's been a huge story, of
And
course, and we're
Island
voting
Pond, Newark.
in Ferdinand, which actually I have a conflict, so I won't say too much, but I own a piece of land over there, but there's a project planned for that, and of course, we've had some rulings lately, the Supreme Court ruling on the Lowell project, so definitely more still happening on wind, and
Yep, and
Oh,
so
that's-
I think that this year's going to end with stay tuned on the Ferdinand project, and we'll see what noise is an issue in Lowell. So we'll find out more about how that progresses too.
And I know you guys all can't do this on a regular basis, but maybe maybe if we tried it every couple months, and maybe we even change up faces if necessary, because I just think it's
He just
it's-
likes to sit and yak with us. We
yeah,
know.
that's it. There's nothing I like more than reporters. But my final words. Everybody had final words. Is and Ed was talking about the schools. Is sometimes we old people have a way of talking
yourself.
about the young people, like those young people. They're not, they're not as good as we are. A lot of times we mythologize how great we were. But I think today's young people are so smart. Most of them are. They are so with it. Like back in our day, I hate to say it, is the idea of designated driver was who was the least drunk, and
True.
it's changed. But like, for example, I have a diary entry talking about the lazy young people of today. This woman was wringing her hands. They don't want to get their hands. It was written in 1870, 1880 in Charleston. I have another diary entry that another person was writing about this listless generation. What are they going to do? That generation she talked about went on to be the greatest generation. World War II. Every generation. We all look back, we romanticize our youths, and they might not, like my kids by far surpassed anything I ever did. Of course, the hurdle was rather low from them. So they had to, but on the other hand, I look at the kids. No, hard work, hard physical work might not get you rich. But kids today, a lot of times, they're using their brains. They're using technology. And, I think we need to cut them some flack
We have
occasionally.
entrepreneurial spirit. It transcends every generation. In America, that's what it is. Everybody hopes, believes that they have an opportunity, and they're creative. And they think outside the box, and that's how we get all our new technology. I mean, from the internet to what Steve Jobs did with Apple. I mean, you look at where we are today and where we were in high school. Well, freshman year in high school, I was still using a slide ruler. That takes you back.
So did I.
In our
how to use
idea,
one.
in our idea of video games was Pong. Had one ball going in the,
We certainly did.
Okay.
I wanna
TI
say
came out with a
one
calculator,
more
remember?
with the next generation and what you said. I can't believe I didn't get into agriculture on this
Next
whole
time you
hour,
can, yeah.
but I'll tell you what, I have seen that entrepreneurial spirit so big in the next generation of agricultural, processing, marketing, all
Dairy
that.
farming, cheese making, you name it.
Yeah, you look.
Every
yeah,
which way you look
really
at it.
nice.
Yeah,
to see
farming's
that.
coming back because of that. And
Yeah.
see, I think that's why, I know you've been on my show before, and you've talked about your book and everything, and I think we ought to try it again more often because
Well, give it-
Because we could spend an hour talking
contrary,
about niche
the three of
marketing
you
and
are from-
agriculture.
The three of you are different from different newspapers, but contrary to what some people might think, you don't hate each other. It's
No,
all
it's friendly
just
competition. Just
No,
like
we'll go
we
back
let
and
the
try
we
to
let the
scoop each other.
editors
That's
we
right.
let the editors worry about the scoops. We just do our job.
Well, it's
Okay,
like
final-
any business person. You compete with your counterparts, but it doesn't mean you dislike them.
all right. It's final words to the viewers, the three of you.
Stay tuned. It's going to, I think, it's fascinating to live around here, and there's going to be so much happen next year. I can't wait.
That's well said. I would say the same thing. It's going to be a good year, I'm sure.
I'd just say 5 to 10 years from now, the face of this area is just going to be completely different, and we're going to see if that's good or bad, and it's probably going to be a mix of both.
And my final
Just like it
words.
is now.
And my final words, just thank you for coming on, because as I said, nothing I like more than sit down with a group of
People
reporters.
like to talk.
Yeah, that's it. And that's one thing I think reporters, they love to talk, but they love to listen, and they love to tell everybody else what you heard.
Absolutely.
All right.
Paid gossips.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.